Welcome, everybody. You are in the right place. If you were just coming in through the waiting room, you are here for the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families and WorkFirst, or TANF WorkFirst training with folks from Solid Grounds Benefits Legal Assistance. We have Patricia Bowen and April here with us. They do amazing work on behalf of folks with low incomes, really trying to access benefits, and they know this system inside and out and can give you really great information today about not only eligibility and income limits and just sort of the nuts and bolts of the process, but they are also going to give you incredible tips about how you can support your folks so that they can either get those benefits, maintain them, if they lose them, what their recourse is, all those really good things that you need to know to help walk alongside your folks to get this really, really crucial cash benefit. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Patricia and April. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Jody.
Thanks, Jody.
Okay, so you guys should be able to see my presentation now. If at any time you have questions, please put them in the chat. If they're technological, we'll try and answer them as we go. If they're related to this presentation, we've built in some question times throughout. That way we don't get segued or anything, but we will make sure to get to everyone. So yes, we are here today to talk about TANF and WorkFirst. My name is Patricia Bowen. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the program manager for Solid Grounds Benefits Legal Assistance Program. And here with me today is April Mazer, our amazing social worker with Benefits Legal Assistance as well. So before we jump in the deep end, we do want to take just a moment to acknowledge the fact that the benefits system and benefits law is steeped in systemic racism. I think it would be an injustice to jump in and not acknowledge that. That being said, we could have our own whole training on just that. So we're not going to go in depth to it, but we did want to share some resources and links if you want to read up on this issue, educate yourself. We're also open to receiving any feedback and resources about this as well, because we want to make sure that we keep this top of mind when we're talking about benefits. So the reason we're here today is to talk about TANF. So we're going to go over TANF overview, kind of what is it, how does it work, what is the WorkFirst program, do you have to follow that, are you exempt from it, what does it look like, support services that are in place for the WorkFirst program, the sanctions process. So if you do fall into some trouble with this, what that looks like, how to get out of it. Some additional programs that exist for people who already receive TANF, some benefits pitfalls that we like to let you know so that you can hopefully avoid them, and then what the hearing and appeal process looks like if you are not able to avoid those, and how to access assistance. Because you're here today, you also get to benefit from what we call our Ask a Lawyer program. It is a kind of email chain that we operate to provide answers to our community partners' questions about benefits. So this is especially helpful if you are dealing with somebody who doesn't necessarily feel safe reaching out to us. We understand. Or if you're not sure if it's a situation where you should be referring them to us, you can ask us first and we can let you know whether this is something that you are more than able to help them with and how to go about that, or whether it is a legal issue and you should refer them. This is also helpful because we at BLA only operate within King County. So if you operate anywhere else in the state, we can't provide direct assistance, but you can still reach out to us for general information. And the benefits issues themselves are largely statewide, although there are some, niche Seattle implementations, but we'll flag that for you. So if you have questions and we can't provide specific one-on-one assistance to that person, you can still reach out to us with questions. So you just email the link or the email address on the slide. We'll share these after as well. Just put in the subject line, ask a lawyer, so we know to answer you directly and not to try and reach out to a client to do an intake. So TANF, you've probably heard it called that, stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. It is one of, if not the most common cash assistance programs available in Washington State for low-income families. You have to be income, resource, family, and citizenship status eligible to receive it. So what that means is you have to receive under a certain amount of money, have resources under a certain amount of money, have a certain number of family members, and then be a United States citizen. Benefits are available for 60 months in a participant's lifetime, with a caveat that there are a lot of exceptions to this time limit. So for example, during COVID, there was a COVID-19 exception. We will go into that in more detail later as well. You must participate in WorkFirst, which is a path to employment. You must follow an IRP or an individual responsibility plan. Each of those are, as the name kind of alludes, individualized. So one person's IRP might be vastly different than another's. So we're going to touch base on that. And then pregnant or parenting teens may be eligible for TANF if they live in an appropriate, an approved living arrangement. So we're going to go over those as well. So TANF payment standards, these might unfortunately look familiar to you because they have not changed from 2024. So unlike some benefits, which automatically increase with standard of living or the poverty line, TANF is not one of those programs. So the only way that TANF payments increase is through legislative change. So last year, there was a legislative push to get these numbers increased, and that was successful in an 8% increase, which is great. However, since then, there have not been an increase. That being said, there is a lot of advocacy on the back end to try and get these tied to the poverty level so that as the federal poverty limit increases, so would TANF in correlation. That being said, it hasn't been approved yet. So these are the payment standards for unit sizes 1 through 10. So what that means is your unit size is your family size. So if you have one person living in your household, you can get it 450. When that unit increases, so does your payment standard. All the way up to 10 plus, which once there are 10 or more people living in your household, it is 1,662. We did include a hyperlink here as well, so you can see if you qualify and if so, what your payment standard would be, so you can use that as well. To know if you are eligible, there are TANF income and resource limits. So what those look like are, the income limit is broken down into 2 spheres, one for earned income and one for unearned income. If your income is from a job, that is considered earned income, and you divide the amount you make by half and compare that to the income chart to see if you're eligible. Unearned income is from any other source. So it can be unemployment, it can be Social Security, anything else that provides you with income that is not a job. Then you take the full amount dollar for dollar, and it must be less than the payment standard shown on the right side of the screen. We will also touch base, I believe in 1 or 2 slides, on what is called a payment disregard. So we'll talk about that as well. But just for this moment, just remember earned income divide by half, unearned income, dollar for dollar comparison. Resource limit is separate. It is not income that you are taking in each month. It is what you have access to. So, or what are otherwise called liquid resources. So that can be cash on hand. It can be money in your bank accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. And for a long time, that resource limit was $6,000. And thankfully, in either end of 2023 or beginning of 2024, that was doubled, which is great. Which means that families can have up to $12,000 in resources, liquid resources, before they become ineligible. In addition, your first car is no longer counted towards that liquid resource limit. So if you have a car worth $10,000 and then you have $3,000 in cash, that's okay. We're not considering the value of that first car. It does include, however, the value of a second, third, fourth, etc. car. So if you have many vehicles on hand, you would have to consider the quote unquote value of or equity of those additional vehicles. That being said, there's some nuance there. We have gotten other vehicles exempt. For example, if you have like a wheelchair accessible van that you need to access your doctor's appointments, things like that, due to your disability, you can make a medical exemption as well. And that's something we're able to help with. So these are the changes that took place last year. So for, oh, there we go, 2024, the resource limit doubled from $6,000 to $12,000. Like I said, entire value of your first vehicle is excluded, and the entire value of a vehicle needed for transportation for physically disabled members is excluded. So like I said, if you have more cars than that, you do have to include them, but beyond that, you can disregard their value. Also, when considering resource limits, you don't have to consider the value of like your everyday items in that. If you have, you know, your furniture, your clothes, your things like that, even though they do have a monetary value, you don't have to consider those when thinking about your liquid resources. That being said, if you have, you know, gold at home stashed away in a reserve or in a lockbox, that is resources on hand. So that is something you need to disclose. And there's some nuance there, but in large part, if it's a day-to-day item that you're using, you don't have to think about the value. If it is a resource that you have for its value, that is considered a liquid resource. So this is the earned income disregard that I was talking about earlier. So this started at the very end of 2024 and is not that commonly known. So we want to give it its own slide so that we can specifically point it out. So this is for earned income only. So unearned income, those Social Security payments, child support, unemployment, that stays the same. You can just think of that as being exactly the same as you've always done. However, if it's earned income, so that's if it's income from your job, not only do you divide it by 2 or disregard half of it, you also disregard $500, and that's the first $500. So for example, family of 3, the parents earn $1,000 a month. It used to be that you would divide that by 2 and their income would be $500, and you compare that to the chart. Now you take the 1,000, you subtract 500 right off the top, you're left with 500, and then that 500 is divided by 2 or half of it is disregarded. So their earned income is 250 of countable income to look at that earlier chart that we showed you. So this greatly advantages or helps families who are right at that brink or at that benefits cliff where they're making just enough to where they're not eligible for these benefits or wouldn't have been. Now they can fall under that and still be able to get benefits a lot of times that they otherwise wouldn't. So just remember, always do that 500 disregard first, then divide by 2. And we're happy to help with that if you have questions as well. So the other change that we talked about that was upcoming last year when we talked about this is what's called a child support pass-through. So right now, if you receive TANF, but you are also receiving child support, so you are the custodial parent and you're receiving child support from the non-custodial parent, as of right now, you only receive $50 if you have one child or $100 if you have more than one child of that child support. The rest pays into the TANF program and you don't see it. So for example, there's kind of a breakdown of 2.5 years from July 2021 to August 2023. DSH has collected 46 million in child support, but families only received 9 million of that. The other 37 million intended for children went to DSHS instead. So there is a big push to change that because between you and me, it makes sense that if you are receiving child support, your child should be the one receiving that child support. And we were able to get legislature to agree. And they passed ES House Bill 1652 that said that as of January of next year, all of that child support would pass through from the payee, from the payer to the recipient. So if you're receiving $300 in child support, you actually get $300 in child support, and you can still be eligible for TANF. However, and this is why we have it included here, right now, it is legislative session, and there's an additional House Bill 2039, which has been proposed that would delay implementation of that pass-through for at least 4 years. As of right now, the bill is still in appropriations, so we don't know if it's going to pass, but we do want to mention it just so that we're not spreading misinformation or an expectation of this January 2026 implementation date that might change and might not be accurate. So we'll keep y'all posted. We're working diligently with our advocacy team to try and make sure that this doesn't pass. However, we can't be sure. Usually we don't talk about pending bills in these presentations because we don't know which way they're going to go. But because this is a direct potential overturn of a past bill that we've talked about, we do want to mention it just so that you know to keep an eye or an ear out regarding that. So the other eligibility requirement for TANF is that, and this is the biggest one that we see as a barrier, is immigration status or lawful presence here in the United States. So in order to receive TANF, you do have to be a United States citizen. So whether you are a qualified immigrant, non-qualified immigrant, or whether you are a non-documented immigrant, you are not eligible for TANF. That being said, in Washington State, we have a separate program called the State Family Assistance Program, or known as the FAP, for families that otherwise would be eligible for TANF. So you meet the income, you meet the resource, you meet the other qualifications, and the only reason you can't get TANF is because of your immigration status. And you go through the same process, you're screened the same way. The only difference being you wouldn't fall into the TANF bucket, you would fall into the FAP bucket. In addition, to be a part of these, both of them, you have to be a Washington State resident. Otherwise, you need to be going through DSHS in the other state where you are a resident. You need to be responsible for the care of children or be pregnant. And then caring for a relative's child or a legal guardian, or are acting in the place of a parent. And we have a separate slide for that as well to go into detail. I believe it's next. It is. So people who are caring for a relative's child or are legal guardians or acting in the place of legal guardians, or If you, as the parent, are ineligible for TANF for reasons other than income, so for example, if you are not a United States citizen, but your child is, you can apply for what's called child only, or in loco parentis or legal guardian TANF. So all of this means that instead of applying as an entire family unit, you are applying on behalf of just a child. And so this can, like I said, take effect in two ways. Either the applicant is not eligible because they're not a US citizen, so it's just the child, or you are caring for a child that is not your biological child. So you can be the sibling, niece, nephew, aunt, uncle, grandparent, first cousin, etc. And you can apply for benefits on behalf of that child. You do have to be within a certain relationship degree of the child, or you have to be the legal guardian. But we're happy to go through that with clients if that becomes necessary as well. Okay, so the other part of this is you are required to cooperate with the Division of Child Support if there is another parent in the picture who is paying child support or should be paying child support. So if you're found eligible, you must go through the screening, see if you need to comply with, and if so, you have to comply with DCS, the Division of Child Support, to set up a child support order for the non-custodial parent. That being said, there are some exceptions. If it is not safe for you to cooperate with DCS, you do not have to. You can get what's called a good cause exception. And the one we see the most often is a domestic violence exception. So if you are the survivor of domestic violence, you can get an exception to say, it is not safe for me to be in communication with the other party, and therefore, please exclude me from this requirement. And as long as you can show that you are in either physical or emotional harm by cooperating with them, you can be exempt. And that can be on either your behalf or your child's. So sometimes DV is something that is suffered by the other parent. Sometimes it is suffered by the child. Very often it is both, but is not required to be. Another kind of subsect of TANF is tribal TANF. So tribal TANF is specific to American Indian and Alaska Native families, and it provides cash aid and services. It is funded by grants that are directly paid to tribes or groups of tribes. So tribes that receive TANF funding design their own program requirements, and they are different from those of standard TANF. Tribal families within a tribe service area can apply for either state or tribal TANF. So you can look into both, see if one is more advantageous or helpful to you than another, and apply for that one. Just because you're an American Indian or Alaska Native does not mean you have to apply for tribal TANF. It is just an option available to you if you have tribal recognition. And each tribe negotiates with the state to determine the grant amount. So we included the link to see what those agreements look like right now as well. So I've mentioned exceptions and extensions at the beginning of this. Just to overview, TANF is available for 60 months or 5 years with a lifetime limit, which is not much considering the average lifetime. So that being said, there are exceptions. So for example, if you're a caretaker and you are over the age of 55 and you're caring for a child that is not your biological child, that is an exception. So even if you've already received TANF for 5 years, you can still receive it again. If you're caring for an adult relative with disabilities, if you're caring for a child that has special needs, or if you're an adult with severe and chronic disabilities, you can also have an exception. There's also extensions, which means that the period of time, the 60 months, is extended. If you're working at least 32 hours a week, if you're a survival of family violence, which is also commonly referred to as domestic violence. If you're working with the Children Administration on child welfare issues involving any of your children, or if you are homeless. The hardship extension for COVID-19 did end about a year and a half ago, so that one does no longer apply. However, you might see that some of the clients that you work with fell into that category, and therefore that time period can still be considered an extension to their 5 years if it applies. It just isn't ongoing. Like I said, the COVID-19 extension is over. And just so we're using the same language as each other, an exception has no time limit. So for example, if you are caring for a child and you're 55 and over, if you are caring for that child for 15 years, then you can receive TANF for those 15 years. However, an extension just provides you with some additional months. So for example, if you are a survivor of family violence, it can give you an additional 3, 6, 12 months of TANF. It does not indefinitely extend your TANF recipiency. So, and DSHS will start screening for these limit extensions when you apply. That being said, don't wait for them to screen. You can work with your client to see if they're eligible, gather documentation, and send that into DSHS. And DSHS is run by humans. Humans make errors. Just because DSHS says that no time limit extensions apply doesn't mean that that is hard and fast and true. So we do still encourage you to look through this with your clients, see if they qualify, and if so, you can appeal to DSHS to rescreen to see if you're correct and your client does have one of these TLEs apply to them. Okay, we're going to go over this very, very briefly, but some other time limit exceptions are so if DSHS does not count months towards your 60-month lifetime limit if it is a relative other than a parent who receives TANF for a child. So if you are doing that in loco parentis on behalf of a child, it does not count towards your 60 months of receiving TANF, for example. If you are an emancipated pregnant or parenting minor living in DSHS approved living arrangements, that does not count as well. If you're an adult living in a tribal reservation where half of the adults living there are not employed, or if you receive TANF for their child but is an ineligible adult because of citizenship or felony status, or because you're receiving SSI. There is also what is called a high unemployment rate time limit extension. Yes, that's a mouthful. If your client receives TANF during a month where there's a high unemployment rate, for example, during April of 2020, during kind of the height of those layoffs and unemployment for COVID, they can receive an exception for those months. So even though that 60-month limit still applies, for example, April would not be considered as one of those months. So if you believe that some of the months your client is said to have received TANF and is being counted towards their 60-month limit, and you're looking at the unemployment rate and thinking, I'm not sure about that, you can have DSHS look into that as well. And a case manager will just verify those months and can approve them for additional TANF months. So we're almost to the question part, I promise, and I will stop talking for a bit. But some tips for the application process, something to keep in mind is if the family you're working with is homeless, make sure that that is very clear on the application, especially if the client is using a family member or friend's address on the application. It's important to put in writing so it can't be disputed or confusing that this family is experiencing homelessness. If possible, at the time of the application or as shortly thereafter as possible, provide proof of income. Applications can be significantly delayed if DSHS is not able to see that proof of income and verify it. In addition, if a client just lost their job or stopped working for any reason, you might need a stop work form. And basically what this says is the income that you are seeing because of my employment history is not my income now. And here is a verification form that says that. The other thing to keep in mind is that advocates can go with their clients to TANF and WorkFirst meetings. And this is a great opportunity to advocate for your client with the person making decisions. It can also really help them feel a significant decrease in stress, because it is stressful to go to DSHS and be asking these questions. It can be overwhelming, the amount of information, as you're seeing just from my presentation. And having someone there who is fully and fundamentally on your side can be so helpful. So we do recommend that if you have the capacity. And now we're going to take a break. So I'm going to open it up to questions, see if anyone has any. I did see that some popped into the chat. However, because I am presenting, I cannot read those. So if we can read those out, otherwise you're welcome to raise your hand or come off of mute. That being said, it is being recorded. So if you're not comfortable being on camera or being recorded, please put them into the chat instead, and I'm happy to answer.
Look at you doing my job for me. Thank you, Patty. The only thing
Like
I
I've,
coming into
like I've
the
done it
chat-
before.
That's right, I know. Well-oiled machine we've got here, except me. I'm feeling a little clunky and broken these days. But
I got you.
the one question I saw come into the chat, and April wonderfully answered, but I like to get it into the recording, is someone had asked, the earned income limits are yearly amounts, question mark? And April responded, that's a monthly income. So I don't know if you want to expand on that at all.
Yes, so the chart does break it down by month. And that is also because sometimes one month you'll be eligible and then the next month you won't. So it's important to break it down by month instead of year so that you can still take advantage of the months that you do qualify. And the most important part there is just to keep DSHS up to date if your income is changing. So if one month you're eligible and the next month, you have seasonal employment and your hours double, and you're over that income limit, just let DSHS know. You won't receive TANF the following month, but then once you go down in hours, you could become eligible again. And that 60-month limit is not like start to finish one straight 5-year period. It is 60 months total. So if you get 1 month and then don't receive it for 3 years and then get 4 months again, you've only received 5 months of it. It's not the 4 years in the interim. And I see a raised hand.
Oh, I'm gonna add in there too. If you're helping a client that has like an hourly income and variable hours, what you can do is take the way that DSHS would calculate it is to take the hourly employment, the like average number of hours they work, and then multiply that by 4.4. And that 4.4 is coming in as like an average over of like how many weeks would be in the month, if you were to take that 52 and divide it by 12. So just in case you're wondering how DSHS is going to calculate that hourly employment, if there's any sort of variation there.
Thank you, April.
Great. And Q, why don't you go ahead and ask your question? And then I do see another question in the chat. We'll do that after Q, you ask your question.
Thank you. And sorry, this is a highly specific question, and I have a feeling the answer is no. But I have had clients who were on TANF and were relatively stable, but once their child support like really kicked in, they ended up making too much in child support to continue receiving TANF. I understand that that is maybe changing, but for right now, I'm having some clients who are getting paid extremely sporadically. Like they might get paid $5 and then not receive any money again for like 2 whole weeks, and then suddenly get $300. And it's just really difficult for people to plan around that and to actually like pay their rent and stuff. Is there anything that can be done like to sort of adjust that sits, and I know this is more a child support question than TANF. It just really sucks because I've had clients who were stable on TANF become destabilized on child support, even though they were receiving roughly the same amount of money just because of the timing of the payments.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you. It is one of those situations where our system is created assuming that every other system works perfectly. And the reality of life is that they don't. So if everyone pays child support in accordance with their child support schedule and the amount of their child support order, then TANF works flawlessly. And also that's not how it works. So we've seen the same thing. What we can advise is if it is putting them into that kind of fluctuation zone, they can apply for TANF, and as long as they themselves are complying with everything that child support asks, the Division of Child Support asks, even if the non-custodial parent isn't paying or is paying sporadically, they may still be eligible, but unfortunately, yeah, we can't guarantee it. And this pass-through could change that as well. So I don't have a great answer, unfortunately.
Great, thank you. So we've got a question in the chat. I love this question because I had the same one when I was looking at the slide. If TANF is only for families, in what cases would the amount for the single person household apply?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I allude to it and don't ever actually say it, so very valid. The most common one we see is those in loco parentis or guardianship or child only TANF applications. So if you, as the applicant, cannot apply either because they are not your child, you are not eligible, you're over the age limit, etc., but your child or the child you are caring for is eligible, you would apply on behalf of the child, but the household would only be the child, because it doesn't take into consideration yourself or others living in the household who are not eligible, specifically due to like immigration status. Obviously, if you make a ton of money, you can't apply on behalf of a child who, oh, the child doesn't have income. Not how it works. But if, for example, immigration is the reason you are ineligible and the child is a US citizen, then you'd be doing child only TANF and the child's household would be one.
Thank you. That's
Or
really,
multiple if there's more than one child. But for the purposes of this simple explanation, child only being a single child.
thank you, really helpful. I'm not seeing any other hands or questions come in, so I'm going to ask, oh, one just came in. And this is exactly where I was going, Jennifer. So thank you for popping it into the chat. Jennifer said,
Yes.
"Is it safe for undocumented parents to file?" And I was going for that same question of any insider information you have around the state family assistance program. And I think we will have this be our final question, and then we'll just for time's sake move on, but keep throwing stuff into the chat if stuff comes up.
Yes, so April and I actually just did a full presentation on immigrant and refugee rights yesterday. So this is very much hand in hand with that. All of this information is gathered and given to DSHS, which is a state administered program. If they are found to be eligible for the federal program, so for TANF, then their information is shared to the federal level. If not, it stays at a state level, and Washington State has an agreement that none of the information that they have is shared with ICE. So the other portion is if you are applying for child only TANF, your immigration status is not asked, is not required to be proven, is not documented in any way. You just say that you are ineligible due to immigration and that you are only applying for the child. So the child is the only one whose immigration status has to be disclosed and proven to DSHS. And then the state funded assistance program, FAP, is, like it says, state funded. So none of that information is ever shared with the federal government and cannot be shared with ICE. With the caveat that this administration is what it is. And I can tell you what the law is, and I can tell you what legally can happen. And I can't guarantee you that that is what happens, but I can tell you that as per the law, yes, it is safe to provide that information to DSHS. And from here, we're going to move on. Keep putting questions in the chat if you have them. We'll address any and all at the end. I also share our contact information at the end, so if we run out of time, we haven't done that before, but if we run out of time, you can always follow up with us as well. And this next portion is on, I believe, WorkFirst, and I'll be handing it over to April.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I'm April Mazer. I am the social worker for our program and help a lot with application processes and stuff like that. So WorkFirst is TANF, there is kind of a employment requirement for TANF, and that is what they call the WorkFirst program. So it requires recipients to search or maintain employment or engage in community services in order to maintain their state benefit. Most TANF recipients are required to participate in employment or job search or job training for 30 to 40 hours per week. The idea is that TANF is, helping hand and not like a long-term program that people would be able to stay on, which is kind of why we see these 60-month time limits and stuff like that. So the idea is that the client is taking active steps to move off of the TANF benefit, and that's why this program exists. So clients, when they're applying, they'll, submit their application, they'll do a financial interview just to make sure that, the information that's on the application is, like all good. And then they will do an orientation, the WorkFirst orientation, and then set up their individual responsibility plan, which is outlining their individual requirements. They again must attend the WorkFirst orientation first, and then you can kind of receive variety of supports. So it's really important to make sure that clients are communicating what their needs and abilities kind of are during those times, so that we can make sure that individual responsibility plan is really tailored to them. And because if there's any failure to comply with the individual responsibility plans, we'll kind of get into sanctions and stuff like that, which Patty will get into a little bit later. So I'm going to hold off talking about sanctions now. So some exemptions from WorkFirst is, like you just had a child, so they're, super young, infant, and, kind of newborn stages where, looking for employment would be really difficult. If the client is 55 or older and takes care of someone else's child, the client has a severe or chronic disability, the child is special needs, or one of the children in the assistance unit is special needs, or they care for a relative with a disability, and you are experiencing like any sort of hardship as defined by the department. And then in terms of kind of those definitions, so exemptions, these don't fall into other categories of good cause exemptions. Hardships are elevated on a case-by-case basis. Some examples of this would be like personal trauma, so the loss of a loved one. They have, there's an accessibility issues. So maybe they don't have phone or internet, housing instability or lack of ability to perform basic hygiene needs like showering, laundry, because, you know, like I think every employer has the expectation that there would be, you know, some basic hygiene that's happening. So that housing instability is a big thing. And then health related challenges or legal obligations. So if you're in the process of going through court proceedings or something like that that are going to take up a lot of your time, you can include that as part of your exemption. So individual responsibility plans, they're basically like a contract between the participant and the department to say, like, this is what I'm going to do in order to move myself out to seek employment or job training in order to be able to move myself out of the position I'm in now and like needing to receive TANF benefits, and kind of moving forward. There is, oh, sorry. So you can, if you need support services for finding your job, that can be included in your individual responsibility plan. So that could be, you know, like gas assistance or childcare assistance, bus passes, and those type of things. If you do not do an activity listed in your IRP, DSHS will sanction you, which is a reduction in your benefits, just as if you failed to take part in the job search. So again, we'll cover sanctions a little bit more in depth a little later in the presentation, but just kind of so we understand what the consequences of not following the IRP is. And then they are completely negotiable with DSHS, which is where I think as advocates, it's really helpful if we can, if you have a client that is maybe more high needs and needs a little bit more assistance in negotiating or discussing with DSHS, this is a really great time as advocates for us to be present and help them through setting up this plan with DSHS. So. The comprehensive evaluation. So part of the process to get the IRP is to kind of go in and talk with DSHS, the TANF caseworker. So we'll talk about, like, you know, what's the family's background? Are there domestic violence concerns? Are there housing concerns? What is the employment status? And, you know, like, what sort of direction can we take with this IRP? The DSHS worker can then help help with assigning services. So if you have somebody that is, you know, having a interpartner violence situation and there's, you know, domestic violence in the household, they can help with making referrals to domestic violence programs. They can also help with like resume writing classes, and other kind of supportive job searching needs. Job training, college assistance is another one that I've seen, and those type of things. So, and then DSHS must involve the participant in the process. So DSHS can't just like make these decisions for the client. The client has to be an active participant in creating their individual responsibility plan and stuff. So, and then, you know, it kind of comes down to like everybody agrees on like these are the next steps, then it would be signed off, and then that IRP then goes into action. So this is just kind of what an IRP sort of looks like, this is kind of DSHS's standardized form on it. Again, it's very negotiable, so I would highly recommend that anybody that is helping somebody with this process, like really, helps advocate or encourages the client to advocate for the things that they need. Just because it's not on this form does not mean it can't be included in your IRP. And again, just kind of an additional sort of example of what an IRP can look like and stuff, and what the type of things that can be included, and assistance that can be provided by DSHS to help with, like mileage or, bus passes. If there's any sort of licensing fees that the job might need, DSHS can help people with those things. College, through like community colleges and stuff, there's oftentimes like job training programs that'll happen there. And then some, again, supportive services that'll go along with WorkFirst are going to be, the Working Connections Childcare Subsidy, or WCCC. Did I get enough C's in there? And the Working Child Connection Subsidy is actually done through DCYF and not DSHS, but it can be kind of included as part of the person's IRP. It can also be, assistance getting uniforms, again, transportation, education, vehicle assistance, if there's tools or equipment needed, and potentially housing or utility assistance. So. Yeah. And then other additional potential large support services will include, there's the earned income tax credit hotline, which is listed here. You can claim this credit if you haven't claimed it in prior years. So if you're curious, if maybe like a client should have received this tax credit but then didn't, you can call the number on the slide here and kind of talk to them a little bit more about whether or not you would be eligible for that tax credit. And then there's also, food assistance, which through the Transitional Food Assistance Program. So what TFA is if you have a client that they just got a job, they are no longer, their income no longer qualifies them to be receiving TANF. So those TANF benefits are going away. What we saw was a really big benefits cliff there, because the client would not only see, termination of their TANF benefits, but they would also see a reduction in their food benefits. So what the Transitional Food Assistance Program does is it gives the client 5 months of the same food benefits that they had while on TANF, while they're kind of transitioning to their employment and kind of how that employment will work. After that 5 months, if the family is still eligible for food benefits, you would just see the reduction. And then if their income is higher and they're no longer eligible for food benefits, then they would see the termination of food benefits at that time. So, and then the exception is when TANF is closed due to non-compliance for sanction. And some tips for WorkFirst. So make sure you're reading the IRP, make sure you understand what is in there, and make sure that the client is not signing the IRP unless they fully agree with what is in the IRP. Like, just make sure that it is well understood what the expectations are for the client, so that they know like what they need to be doing to maintain their benefits and stuff, so that they don't see something like a sanction happen and now they're not sure how they're going to be able to pay bills and stuff because now their income's been reduced. So it's really important to understand what is in the IRP. As advocates, as Patty mentioned earlier, attend the WorkFirst meetings if you're able to. Have the client call you while they're talking to their WorkFirst caseworker, like whatever it takes, you know, or however you guys can kind of manage that. I would really encourage you to be present if you can be present. If you can't be present, you know, you can also you can also set up like a consent form with the TANF WorkFirst case manager, or you can set yourself up as the authorized representative so that you're able to communicate with DSHS on behalf of the client, and you can kind of help them communicate and navigate that situation. If the client has any health problems, they don't have to engage in the job search, but it needs to be in the IRP. Like the IRP is going to be like the goalposts, and if we are outside of the IRP, we are outside of the goalpost. So it's just really important to make sure that everything, including, you know, housing status, physical or mental illnesses, anything like that, is reported in the IRP. There are other reasons why a person would not have to engage in the job search. So if you're curious about a full list, the Washington Administrative Code, or the WAC, is listed here. You can view that after the presentation, or while you're working with a family, just to see if maybe some other sort of things might apply on how they would be required to engage in those services. So, and they can still use, you know, the WorkFirst support services. So really encouraging people to like mention the things like, hey, like I have a vehicle, but you know, this first month of work, I'm not really sure how I'm going to pay for gas. Like, make sure DSHS knows that, and they can help the client kind of make sure that there's gas money for their car, or there's bus fare provided so that they're able to get from point A to point B. And then there's new good cause exemption for WorkFirst. When working with clients that are unhoused, the goal of the IRP can be to conduct housing related stuff. So if you have a family that, you know, they're they're fully unhoused, or maybe they're, you know, staying with relatives, kind of bouncing around and stuff, make sure that that is something that is being relayed to DSHS, because then instead of making job search and job functioning part of the IRP, it can then transition to, you know, housing stability options instead. So again, just really making sure that clients are talking to DSHS about what their individual needs are, so that the IRP is as individualized to the client as possible. So some examples of that would be meeting with a housing stability case manager. They can meet with a DV advocate, or just kind of obtain documents needed for housing, and, you know, replacing IDs and stuff like that, or attending counseling sessions. If you have a client that is, you know, like really struggling with some mental health concerns, you can have them make counseling and kind of dealing with those concerns the IRP, instead of focusing on job search and stuff like that. Because again, like the idea of the IRP is to make the plan as individualized as possible, to assist the client in kind of getting to a place that's better than where they currently are. Questions?
Great. We do have a couple in the chat. So one is, will those supports that you mentioned, like resume writing, college classes, etc., be paid for by DSHS?
Yeah. Yes. So I have a client that, you know, for a long time, her IRP was actually just to attend classes at Green River Community College. So that was, you know, the big thing for her. I've also seen clients where you know, housing search and stuff is the concern, and part of is the main focus of the IRP. So yeah, I would say that those sort of services and stuff are really really recommended, and DSHS will help pay for them.
Fantastic. And the second question is, what is the typical expectation for how long it takes to apply and receive TANF?
Oh, this is such a variable question, I think, because it's really gonna depend on how engaged the participant can be, right? So the application process for TANF is you do the application, which can be done through washingtonconnection.org, or it can be a paper application, or you can call into DSHS and do the application. So you have your application, and then you have your financial interview. So this piece is just DSHS going through the application with the person and just making sure that the information that is being provided is, like, is going to keep them within those income caps that we saw earlier in this presentation. Once they complete the financial interview, they will be told that they need to do the WorkFirst orientation. And then that, once completed, they would be then directed to talk with a WorkFirst or TANF caseworker, and that's when the IRP is going to get set up. So because there is multiple steps to this application process, there's lots of little places where delays can happen. So like, maybe you put in the application on Monday because that's the only day that your client is available. So the rest of the week, Tuesday through Friday, they're working. They cannot go to DSHS. They can't sit on hold for hours to like talk to people to do these things. So because there's those time gaps in there, Mondays are the only days we're dealing with this. So it's going to take a few weeks to go through. That, in comparison to a client that maybe is unemployed or doesn't have, has a little bit more flexibility with their time, they might be able to get the process done in a couple of days. So it really just kind of depends on, like the client's individual needs and abilities at that time. Generally, when clients are approved for TANF benefits, what they can expect is, if it is, I think it's like the 15th of the month is kind of when DSHS sort of their like mid-month mark. And so if it's, prior to the 15th, what'll happen is they will prorate. So like client is approved, applies and is approved on like the 9th, for instance. They'll prorate the month of benefits for them. And then on the 1st of the following month, they would receive the full month benefit. The initial deposit then would be issued to the individual via their EBT card, and that would be available to them within 24 to 48 hours of the approval. Generally 24. Sometimes if DSHS is like, something's going on their end, it can go up to 48, but generally I've seen it within 24 hours of that decision being made, the client is having access to their funds. If it is after the 15th of the month, what you might see is that DSHS might just give them the first issuance. So they would have the prorated for like, month of March and then the month of April. They will just combine that into the first issuance. So you get the prorated amount, the full amount, that's your first issuance. And then starting, May 1st, that's when you would just get the monthly benefit. So it sort of depends a little bit on like time of application and stuff like that. But I think that answered the question.
That was a very thorough answer. Thank you. Another question coming up. Can there ever be temporary changes or additions to the IRP? I have someone with short-term health issues that needs to get some accommodations to be able to participate in the program.
Yes, absolutely. The first step in it is just reaching out to the TANF caseworker. So when people are on TANF, they have a specific social worker that is assigned to them. That is their TANF caseworker. So they can reach out to that individual and tell them like, hey, my situation has changed. Can we talk about my IRP? And they want to do that as soon as possible, because any sort of lapse in that, not following that IRP can put them at risk of a sanction. I keep mentioning these sanctions. I promise we'll be talking about them, but it does put the person at risk of a sanction. So just talk to the TANF caseworker as soon as possible. They can amend that IRP as many times as it needs to be amended.
Great. And Q put a sort of inquiry into the chat that's quite specific to them and their clients, and I might invite Patricia or April to follow up with Q in a sidebar. I also want to mention that Q has put in some really important messages earlier in the chat around just our earlier conversation about just the realities of this administration and targeting folks and abducting of folks. So really appreciate you putting that in there, because it's just the reality of everywhere we're at. And part of the coalition is really to be in solidarity with each other and to make sure that we are aware of what's happening, so we know where to put our collective power and force to push back against these atrocities. So thank you for that, Q. I am not seeing anything else in the chat. So before we move on, Danielle is going to share a link to our coalition's general membership meeting last week, our March meeting, because you mentioned earned income tax credits. And it just flagged for me that we had the United Way free tax clinic folks do a little presentation at our meeting last week. So if you missed it, it's all right there on YouTube. But they talk about the earned, the working families tax credit, not just for families. And they can help you apply for it. Try to get it from back years if you were eligible or your clients were eligible. And also, this is the last year to claim your 2021 stimulus check. We are past the deadline for 2020, but the 2021 stimulus check can still be claimed. They can help you with that for free. So it's an aside, but I'm pulling it in. Let's get money into people's hands. Okay. I'm going to have us move on, but let's keep throwing stuff into the chat. I'm really appreciating this conversation. So thanks all.
Thank you, Jody. And yes, Q, my contact information will be at the end of this presentation, and please reach out to me. I'm happy to give some individualized suggestions or advice as much as I can, or at least steer you in the right direction for resources. So please reach out. And yes, thank you for highlighting that working family tax credit. Also, just to throw this out there, the term working is very loose. You literally just have to have earned $1. So if you've had any earned income in the year, $1 or more, you should apply, even if you don't have a regular income each month. So just to throw that in, because it's important to know. And we'll actually get back to TANF now. So as April mentioned over and over, sanctions. So TANF workforce sanctions, what are they? Sanctions are a penalty or a punishment that lowers the amount of the TANF monetary amount given to a family. They can sanction you or stop your TANF altogether if they decide that you have failed or refused to comply with a portion of your IRP without good cause, or if you have failed to meet one of your WorkFirst requirements. So what that means is either you are not doing something on your IRP, like applying for 3 jobs a week, or meeting with your housing stability manager, whatever's on your IRP, or if the one that I see the most is if you are not cooperating with or complying with the Division of Child Support, they can also sanction you for that, unless you have an exception like DV. Your medical assistance will not change with a sanction, or if DSHS closes your TANF, just your TANF cash assistance will. So those are separate. So this sanction process looks as follows. They will lower the amount of your money given by the greater of one share, or 40%, whichever is more, after you don't meet your IRP or WorkFirst requirement for 2 months. So if you have an oopsie and you mess up one time, as long as you fix it immediately and don't have that error last at least 2 months, it's okay. That being said, obviously you don't want to rely on that because sometimes life gets in the way and you find yourself falling into a second month of that mistake. But for example, if you're having housing instability, if you find yourself being evicted, and you are so overwhelmed, as one does, with that process, and you don't reach out to DSHS for a few weeks, and then you reach out in your second month, you can keep yourself from falling into sanction for not complying with WorkFirst, for example, or your IRP, by letting them know that now you have housing instability and need to alter your IRP. But we always suggest, as soon as is possible for clients, reach out if you believe you might fall into sanction or non-compliance. Once you're in that sanction status, if you remain there for 12 months, DSHS will end or stop your TANF. So that means the 2 amounts, the 2 months where you initially had the error that led to you being in sanction, and then 10 more months at that reduction of benefits equals that 12-month total that they look at before they end your benefits. That being said, that only applies for non-compliance with IRP. If you do not comply with the Division of Child Support, they can end your benefits immediately. I learned that the hard way when trying to argue that DSHS had not complied with their sanction status, and was sternly informed by the court that this only applies to IRP and does not apply to compliance with child support. So make sure your clients are complying with Division of Child Support. If they can't, due to a safety reason, that you are communicating that as soon as possible, because you don't want to see them fall into what I think is a large loophole and kind of broken point in the system, but they didn't ask my opinion. So when you find yourself in sanction before termination, so those 10 months, DSHS should let you fix, or what they call is cure, the sanction so that you can get that sanction removed and come out of sanction status. They will let you know when they're putting you on sanction, when they're taking you off of sanction, either to remove or end your benefits, or because they're taking you out of sanction to regular status because it's been cured. They need to let you know in letters, and they need to attempt to schedule a meeting with you before starting that sanction. That being said, you can't just ignore their letters and their attempts to schedule a meeting and hope that it goes away. As long as they show that they've attempted to meet with you, that does count as them meeting with you, and they can put you in sanction status. So what this looks like is, first, DSHS has to send you a letter of non-compliance. This states that, whatever your IRP is, has not been followed. Here's the evidence. Here's what will happen next. They also then must attempt to schedule a meeting, which is called a case staffing management meeting. And at that point is when they're supposed to follow up with the client and see, is there a good reason why you are not complying? And if so, does your IRP need to be adjusted? They, at this time, should be asking, is there any family violence occurring? Are there housing barriers? Are there mental health or physical barriers? Is anything currently there that is keeping you from compliance that wasn't there when you initially made your IRP? DSHS then can decide if, given that information, there's good cause for some changes to be made to your IRP and for a sanction to not go into place. If there is good cause or good reason, a sanction won't go into place and you'll just have either a temporary or permanent change to your IRP. If you're meeting with them and the reality is, you just had a slip up and you did err, you didn't comply with your IRP, but there's not an underlying reason, then you will go into sanction. At which point DSHS sends a letter at least 10 days in advance of that sanction starting that explains why you're getting the sanction, how to fix the sanction, and it includes appeal rights. So if you met with them at your case staffing meeting and you gave what you think was a very good reason, and maybe it wasn't interpreted that way by the case manager you met with, you can appeal it and ask for it to be re-reviewed to see if there is in fact good reason or good cause. After 10 days, at least 10 days, DSHS will lower your TANF amount if you have not successfully appealed. So why are people sanctioned? The most common, or the reason they do it is because what they say is you either failed or refused without good reason. And the reasons for those are either that you gave your case manager information that they needed, either not within deadline, not accurate information, or didn't communicate with them at all. If you don't go to any appointments that are listed in your IRP as required, so if your IRP is saying, you need to meet with a case manager or a mental health therapist, and you don't show up, that would be non-compliance. It's important, if you're not able to fully comply with your IRP, to show your case manager why that is. So if you are on your way to a meeting with your mental health therapist and your car broke down, communicate that to your case manager. That is a very reasonable, understandable issue that can come up. Life happens. And that might also be a event that allows them to further assist you. For example, now you have a transportation barrier. Can they help get your car fixed? Can they help you with bus pass so that you don't fall into that same position again? It's also important to note that this is a transitional program to get you into the workforce and working. However, the job that you take does have to comply with labor laws, and does not and cannot have unreasonable working conditions, hours, demands, conditions, etc. So it has to be, quote unquote, above the table. It has to be compliant with the law. Otherwise, it doesn't count as employment and can get you into some murky waters as well. So I've mentioned good reason or good cause several times. There's quite a bit of wiggle room with this. There are some explicitly stated reasons for good reasons or good cause, such as a serious physical, mental, or emotional condition, someone threatening you or subjecting you to family violence. Another reason can be that DSHS didn't actually comply with the rules. So for example, if you did not get a notice because DSHS messed up and didn't send it to you, that lets you know how to attend your meetings, what will happen if you don't go to your meetings, what the expectations of your IRP are. Or for example, if you cannot find affordable childcare for a child under 13, all of these can be reasons that pop up that prohibit you from complying with what was on your IRP. In addition, your transportation or childcare arrangements broke down. Like I said, if you are attempting to comply with your IRP and life happens and gets in the way, communicate those, because those can be seen as good reasons as well. Also, like April mentioned earlier, if you have immediate legal problems, that can also be considered. And the one we see quite often is if you're dealing with an active eviction. If you are receiving notices in the mail, a summons, complaint, if you're going to hearings, that is so much attention, time, energy, turmoil that you need to be focusing on in another direction, that is reasonable under the IRP and under WorkFirst for you to be focusing on that and to be putting your IRP or job search on the back burner if you're communicating this with your caseworker. And that's the biggest, which is contact them as soon as you receive that notice. Let them know that you need to prioritize this. And if you are or should have been designated a person receiving equal access, it's formerly known as an NSA. Now it's an EAP, an equal access plan. And they failed to do so. They failed to give you those accommodations. That can also be found as a good reason for you to have non-compliance. Again, communicated to your case rep. So tips to avoid this: call DSHS on the phone or on your IRP as soon as you know you won't be able to comply. So if you know 2 days in advance that your babysitter is sick and won't be able to watch your child, call them in advance. If you find out in the moment when your car won't start and you can't go to your meeting, call them. If you find out when you receive an eviction notice in the mail, call them. It's basically as soon as is reasonably possible for you to do so, contact your DSHS worker. And at that time, explain what happened, explain why it was out of your control, and explain how it's going to impact your ability to comply. If you can't get a hold of them, leave a detailed message and keep your own record of the date and time that you called. They are required to keep track of all messages and all calls that come through. That being said, if you just say, I called you in sometime in February or March or April, it's going to be really hard to find evidence to support that claim. But if you can say, I called you on March 26th at 4 p.m. and left you a message, it's going to be really easy to verify whether you did or did not call. So just write it down, whether that be in a notes app on your phone, piece of paper, anywhere that makes sense. Keep track of your communication so you can like very clearly show you made every effort to let them know within a timely or a decent amount of time. And also keep in mind, DSHS has to attempt to schedule a meeting with you before they sanction you. And advocates can and should, if possible, attend these meetings with their clients. The other portion of this is if your TANF was closed due to a sanction that took place before July 1st of 2021, and you can now reapply and your case will be reopened not in sanction status. So if you have a client who thinks, I was terminated, I don't even want to deal with TANF, I don't want to deal with the headache of the sanction process. If it happened prior to July 1st, 2021, they don't have to worry about getting themselves out of sanction status by reapplying. However, if they were closed out since July 1st, 2021, you can reapply. However, you must take part in a work activity for 4 weeks before you can get TANF again. So there is that kind of differentiating line in the sand regarding sanction status. If your client ended their TANF for any reason other than sanction, this portion can be disregarded. This is just if they were removed from TANF for sanctions. Like it says. Yeah. We're going to take a pause here to talk about sanctions, and then we'll move on. And I think might be one in the chat.
I don't see anything in the chat, but I might invite you and April to just respond to what I'm about to say, because I've listened to the two of you and your colleagues talk about public benefits specifically, but specifically, TANF, and I'm always struck by that this system that is high barrier, highly regulated. I think we can argue, you know, maybe not as well funded as it could so that it can serve people as well as ideal. So the burden is really placed on, you know, I think in large part, you know, advocates or, you know, service workers that are supporting clients trying to get this. And the key, and this is the thing I'm curious if you all have thoughts about this, but I keep hearing and why I keep coming back to is the key is that really sort of like to make noise, whether it's, I think I have this right, you know, I think I have this, you know, resource, I'm eligible for this resource, I think you made a mistake. Here's how I'm not complying. And this is so, I think, counterintuitive to a lot of folks that have been harmed by systems and have been harmed by sort of, you know, state system violence. And that to me seems like a hard thing to be able to communicate, to be like, no, actually, you do want to bring attention to yourself in this thing that you weren't able to do because it's in the long run going to actually help you, or, you know, how to learn how to advocate for yourself or walk alongside someone and advocate for them.
Yes.
So yeah, it just strikes me as such a like hard thing, probably in a very like emotional, psychological way to get over. And I just want to kind of double down on that and see if the two of you have any thoughts to share.
Yes. I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of how burdensome and how lopsided the burden is in benefits in general, but TANF specifically. It always strikes me as it's kind of like a court of law where if you see something wrong, you have to object. Otherwise, you lose the right to ever talk about it again. This is the same idea where if you think you have an exception, if you think you have a life event that should be considered, you have to say something. Otherwise, down the road, you've lost the right to say that that was justified reason for anything that comes after. So it really, really, really is important to be raising those issues. Which is a lot to ask when you're in the middle of so many other moving parts and other trauma and other responsibilities and stresses. It is a lot to say, yeah, if you're dealing with DV, just give us a call. You're dealing with DV. There are so many other things on your plate. Or, oh yeah, if you're evicted, just give us a call. That is so much to ask if you don't have stable housing. Yes, it is not a perfect system. It is not even a good system. That's my own opinion. That is not represented by Solid Ground, but that's my opinion. It is very broken. That being said, it is also hugely important because if you bring something up in the moment, even if it is blatantly ignored by DSHS, someone like me can then step in, go to court, and say, nope, they met their obligation, and the errors that happened since then are DSHS's fault, and you now owe my client money. If you don't bring it up, then a court can say, yeah, that was a good reason, and it wasn't communicated. So therefore, you're in sanction. And that is heartbreaking and very backwards in a lot of ways. And I would love to see it changed. But the reality of the situation right now is the burden is on the client, or, you know, you as a caseworker to assist your client to take that first step to bring up anything you think might be of importance.
I also just want to take some time to acknowledge that it can be really like there's a lot of kind of racialized components that can go into what you were just talking about, Jody. And it, you know, I think that sometimes on the client end, it can feel very much like they're at odds with DSHS, which is very like counter to what we're saying. Like what we're saying is you have to work with DSHS, you have to communicate these things. But if you have a TANF caseworker that is making you feel, you know, or making the participant feel like they, you know, are somehow beneath them, or, you know, like there's being discriminated against or something like that, like it can be really hard to want to reach out to that person. And I think we just having had the opportunity to work with people and communicate with their TANF caseworkers and stuff, like it's a real problem within, you know, the department and kind of our benefit systems overall. So just kind of taking the opportunity to re-highlight what we highlighted in the beginning of this is that there are a lot of like racialized and stigmatized things that are going into this that make the client feel unsafe or unwelcome to do those things. So
Thank you both so much for raising those things. You're getting some love in the chat, and I will also take the opportunity to be like, these are your folks, these are your advocates, these are the ones that are going to help you. So on that note, I'm not seeing anything else. I'm going to hand it back to you both.
all right. So I touched on this briefly. The Working Connections Childcare Subsidy is a subsidy that's run through DCYF that would allow for subsidized childcare. There are kind of the child receiving care must be a citizen or legal resident of the United States. So have, you know, those qualifying citizenship statuses. And then there's two different types. There's the WorkFirst families, and that's for approved activities. So if your client or the participant is in, you know, like job training programs and they need childcare during that job training, the WorkFirst families, that would, you know, help them cover that. And then working families with an income that is at or below the 60% of the state median income. At the time of the application, it can, so the 60% is if the client is renewing the child care subsidy, it's 65% of the SMI during application. So this childcare subsidy will work a little bit different in comparison to a lot of what we talk about for like SNAP and stuff, where it's actually kind of tied to the federal poverty line, where the childcare subsidy is actually tied to the state median income. So kind of different numbers there. So just want to highlight that and explain kind of what we're looking at there. And then families will pay a copay directly to the provider. It can be as low as $0 a month and up to $215 a month, kind of depending on what their income is and where they sit on, you know, the income scale that they have for this. There's also the diaper subsidy. So families with young children under 3 that are on TANF will receive an additional $100 a month in cash benefits as an increase. And that is as of November 1st, 2023. And that's just to help with, you know, diapers and other things that go along with having, like expenditures that go along with having a very young child in the home. There's also emergency cash assistance for TANF families. So ERIN or additional requirements of for emergent needs. So, you know, client has an unexpected, you know, housing or utility need. They can, you know, request this additional funding with their TANF caseworker. The maximum benefit is $750 over a 12-month period. And in some cases, they can receive more if it's related to a health or safety issue. The other thing is diversion. This is alternative assistance for families that have a short-term need and do not wish to receive TANF. So maybe, you know, they are in between jobs, like they are leaving a job and then going into a new role, but that new role doesn't start for a little while. So there's going to be this gap. This would be kind of that diversion assistance would be an option there. And then there's the Consolidated Emergency Assistance Program, or SEAP. This is a cash program available to families or a pregnant individual who faces an emergency and do not have the money to meet their basic needs, including families whose TANF cash assistance has been terminated in sanction, or who's already received the 60 months of TANF, so they don't qualify for because of the time limit extension, or they don't qualify for a time limit extension. Assistance is limited to no more than 30 consecutive days within a period of 12 consecutive months. I think we can move to the next slide. Yeah. And then what to report to DSHS. So when a client is approved for any benefit in Washington State, DSHS is required to send them what they call an award letter. And this award letter will outline, like what days the benefits will be deposited. With cash benefits, it's always on the first. It'll explain how their income was calculated. It'll explain, what their issuance and what their benefits will be. And it'll also go over the reporting requirements, like kind of towards the end. So those are the things like if your income goes over a certain amount, you need to report this. If you win the lottery or have a big cash grant gift that comes to you, you have to report this, and kind of those specific things. So if you're unclear on whether or not a client should report something, an easy thing to do is ask for the approval letter and see, like what is in the approval letter, what is DSHS saying that the client needs to report. You want to report if you have moved or someone, including the child, moves in and out of the home. You have to report changes in your total gross income. So benefits are always calculated on gross income and not disposable income or net income. So it's always the pre-taxed amount. So you want to make sure that if there's any changes to that income, that's being reported. If your liquid assets go over the $12,000 resource limit, or if you have changes to your employment or approved work activity. So like if you're, going to work, but for some reason there's going to be like a couple of days that you might not be working, like reporting those things to DSHS. And you can report these changes a couple of ways. I think the kind of more exact way to do this is to call DSHS through their customer service line, and just letting the navigator know, like, I need to report a change, and they will be able to direct the person to the correct party. The other way you can do this is on the WashingtonConnection.org website. There's on the left-hand side, you'll see some kind of orange buttons, and one of those is to report a change. So you can just click that. It'll prompt the person through filling out the form and then automatically submit it to DSHS at the end of that, and then give them like a confirmation number and an option to print out the form. I always recommend that the client make note of the confirmation number. And if they have the ability to like print that page to a PDF, that's a good option. If you're helping a client and you want to make sure you're maintaining the records for them, another really great way to do that is to, print a PDF for the confirmation page as well as the application. So you have both forms. With the application, it'll show, or the form, it'll automatically kind of feed in things to the actual DSHS form. So you'll get like what the form actually looks like when you do that. And then when to report to DSHS. So all changes need to be reported to DSHS by the 10th of the following month following the change. So if your income is going up in March and you're now going to be receiving, more money, and so you need to report this change to DSHS. You then have till the 10th of April to report that change to DSHS, and to be in compliance with them. For changes in income, the date can change. The date of the change happened is the date you received income based on the change. So if you have a client that is, they've gotten their award letter for Social Security benefits, for instance, but those Social Security benefits aren't going to be deposited for a couple weeks because that happens with Social Security quite often. So, like, there's going to be, like, they got the award letter, they know this change is happening. They don't actually have to report the change until the 10th of the month following when they actually receive the income. So there can be kind of some ambiguity there, but just something to kind of keep in mind on reporting those changes. For households that are receiving TANF or the state family assistance, if the child in your assistance unit will be gone from the home for longer than 180 days, you must report it within 5 calendar days of that change. And then if the child is gone temporarily, so less than 180 days, the parent can still receive the TANF grant for parent and child. So pitfalls, because I think that this is probably the thing that most of us have questions about here. So avoiding pitfalls and helping people with the application process. So again, making sure you're reporting changes on time. Like, when did the change happen? If it's the middle of March, okay, we have until, April 10th to report that change. So making sure you're reporting things on time. You can always, if you have questions about, like, should my client be reporting this? Like, can we just go over, like, these timelines again? Because, like, I went to this great presentation, but can't remember what you said. We've all been there. Reach out to us. Like, we are more than happy to answer any questions that might come up to assist you to best assist the client and participant in, accessing these benefits. Making sure you're complying with your WorkFirst requirements and making sure that your individual responsibility plan is very, very individualized. I'm going to harp on this the whole time because I think that in the work that I do with our program, it is very much about helping people navigate the IRP and the application process. So I see this so frequently that I'm really like, I'm going to beat a dead horse on it. I'm sorry, but make sure your individual responsibility plan is individualized for the participant so that they can stay in compliance, so that they don't receive any of those sanctions and stuff. Or just being, reaching out to the case manager when there is an issue with compliance. So again, like, going back to what Patty was saying earlier, if your car breaks down, if there's, acts of God or, whatever is going on, because life is going to be life. It's not smooth sailing all the time. And I think that all of us in this room know that, the more disadvantaged an individual is, it's oftentimes those are the people that are going to see the most barriers in place. So just making sure that you are definitely just, like, reaching out to DSHS and making sure that those things are done and relayed to them. So equal access plans. I highly recommend, if you have a client that would have any issue communicating with DSHS, interacting with DSHS, their life is really complicated, so they may need more time to respond to letters or requests from DSHS. Like, ask for an ask for an equal access plan. So what an EAP is it's really, it is a agreement in place with DSHS that make sure that DSHS is doing what the client needs in order for them to be able to maintain and access benefits. So this can look like, again, getting extra time to respond to requests from DSHS. If there is somebody you're working with that has sensory issues and loud environments are really hard for them, they can make sure that DSHS is talking to them in a quiet environment and make so that they are able to comprehend that. Language access is a huge thing. Make sure that DSHS is sending letters. Like if you're working with a client where English is not their native language and they more complex conversations need to be had with an interpreter, make sure that DSHS is sending those letters to the client in the language that they are going to be able to best understand the letters. I will note on that when DSHS sends letters to a client, they will that has a language access issue. They will send the letter in two different sort of things. They'll send it in English and then they'll send it in the native language also. So the copy of the letter will go out twice. And then designating an authorized representative. So whether or not that is you as their caseworker or a family member or just somebody that can help them communicate with DSHS and stay in contact with DSHS on their behalf. Yeah. And then
And I'm just doing a little time check. We've got about 5 minutes left and I think we've got a few more slides. So just a friendly reminder.
yeah. So what to do if it goes wrong?
April, do you want me to jump in on
yes.
this part? Yeah. Okay, so if you run into any of these issues, the most important thing, if I can tell you nothing else, is request a hearing. It is nearly impossible if you don't do so to get assistance after the fact. So if you think there might be a reason why something is an error, request a hearing. If you think your client that you're helping might have had something ignored, done incorrectly, wrong amount was issued, anything, request a hearing. What that does is give you more time to find out if this is a true issue, if this is something that an attorney can help with, if this is something that they do need to go to hearing for. It also gets a hearing case rep to look at their case and reevaluate it. Sometimes that's all it needs. Is this a great system? No. Does it work? Yes. And this is what we have right now. So request a hearing. Easiest way to do that, if the client has internet access, is to go through the link that we added to the screen. You literally just log on, put in your information, put in your DSHS number, and you as an advocate can do it on their behalf. They can do it themselves. If we're helping them, we can do it on their behalf, and it automatically asks for a hearing and sends you a receipt of that request. If that's not an option, you can also call them, you can write to them, you can fax them, you can email them, any and all options available. Other thing to note, you do have a right to representation. You do not have an automatic right to representation. So unlike small claims court or eviction court, you don't automatically get screened for an attorney if you're low income, but you can bring an attorney if one is available to you. So for example, in King County, ones are available to you. It's us. Call us. The phone numbers to call to ask for that hearing are on the screen. I'm going to go a little bit quickly just to make sure we get through everything. And this is the main reason why we say, if you're not sure, request a hearing, because there are deadlines in place. So to request a hearing because you believe something is an error, whether that's termination, denial, being charged for overpayments, anything, you have 90 days to request that. And in addition, if you're trying to continue your benefits while you're going through that hearing request or hearing period, which we advise, you need to make that request within 10 days, which is very, very short. That being said, there are some wiggle room in this. There is good cause exception for these 10-day and 90-day deadlines. So for example, being unhoused, being hospitalized, things like that can be exceptions. it is a much, it's an uphill battle versus just applying for getting approved and going through. But if you realize your client has missed this deadline, that doesn't mean they don't have options. It just means you might have to look into good cause. I also have the Ask a Lawyer on here again, just to remind you, please reach out to us with questions. But the other part I want to make sure to get in before we run out of time is how to refer clients to us. So if you're in King County, if you think there is a legal issue, please reach out. We are open for intakes. We're happy to help. And if you aren't sure if there's a legal issue, refer them to us. We'll look through their case file and we'll let you know if there's a legal issue. If not, obviously, there's only so much we can do, but if so, we'll help. So you can either reach out to our email address and just say that it's a referral or an intake, or call our intake line. And if you have individualized questions either about this presentation, future presentations, what it is, work that we do, etc., my and April's email are also on the screen. I realize I have 1 minute. I do want to flag as well that the WCCC program, you are not required to be a TANF recipient to be a recipient of this program. Because it has a completely different income threshold, you can very commonly be found eligible for this program, even if you're not eligible for TANF. So just something to keep in mind if you are helping a family that doesn't qualify for some of these other federal poverty income run or guideline programs, they might still qualify for this. And just so I can give you an example, federal income, the monthly limit for two-person household is $1,762. But for the Washington State median income, it is $7,502. So those are very different numbers. And even 60% of that is over 2 times as much as the federal poverty limit. So just to flag that, if you have a family that's right on the cusp, can't get TANF but needs childcare, look into this program because they very well might qualify for this. And I'll stop talking to see if there's any last minute questions.
I'm not seeing any. I think I might encourage folks to just reach out to y'all directly because we're a little over. Thank you so much, April and Patty. Every time I am just impressed with the amount of information, good advice, intricacies you all share in such a straightforward way for folks to navigate these systems, and so grateful that you're here to do it with us. So thank you very much. Just a reminder, this is being recorded. It'll be up on our YouTube shortly. We share the slides out as well, so you will have all this information. Thanks all for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And if you're able to stay on, we have one more announcement. I'm going to stop